the legitimate governor-elect of Georgia?
He is the person who won an adequate number of votes
but that's
to become the governor.
With all due respect, you're not using the word legitimate. Is he the legitimate governor-elect of Georgia?
He is the legal governor of Georgia.
So we're going to talk about that. And Florida, always a powder keg of electoral messiness, today saw the resignation of the woman who became the face of that head-scratching voter insanity that we watched over the past couple of weeks. But is Florida destined to still be a big concern in 2020?
Rick Scott won, and he won by a lot. I don't know what happened to all those votes that disappeared at the very end. And if I didn't put a spotlight on that election before it got down to the 12,500 votes, he would have lost that election, okay? In my opinion, he would have lost. They were taking that election away from him.
So my next guest played a crucial role there. Jessica First Johnson, being called the GOP's secret weapon in Florida. The 37-year-old Florida native is considered one of the foremost election law experts in the country. Lesser known than Democrat lawyer Mark Elias, whose name is known to many as the Clinton attorney, he flew to Bill Nelson's side to push for the recount. Johnson was crucial to Governor Scott's outcome and is watching Florida and Georgia's matching laws ahead of the presidential race. And she joins me now. Good to have you with us, Jessica, this evening. Thanks for being here. You say that as soon as you saw that Mark Elias was headed to Florida, you knew that you needed to head there as well. Why?
Well, you know, as an election law attorney, I certainly recognize his name. And when I saw that he was interested in this race, I knew it was going to be a really big deal. I also knew that, you know, Governor Scott was victorious on November 6th. He won by more than 12,000 votes. So I knew if Mark Elias was still interested in this race after a 12,000 vote victory, I knew that I needed to pay attention to it too.
So in terms of the rules that need to be governed or perhaps changed, what are they?
Well, you know, I think that's a really important question. And I think after the 2000 election, you know, Florida took a long, hard look at these election laws. Obviously, they didn't want a repeat of that situation. There have been subsequent changes since. There was another issue in 2016 regarding provisional ballots. And the state took another opportunity to look at their laws there. So, you know, that's very important. I mean, this state was not foreign to the concept of revisions to election laws, and these laws were in place for a reason. Certainly, when you have an opportunity to test them out, like we did in this recount, there are going to be things that we want to review and see if we can do differently. But these laws were in place, and they had to be followed. Every single lawsuit that Governor Scott put his name on was intended to make sure the rule of the law was followed. Every single lawsuit the Democrats tried to bring forward was to do something about that law in order to make sure their candidate could win.
What about what Stacey Abrams said about the legitimacy of the Georgia race?
Yeah, you know, I think that's so interesting and unfortunate. And I think the reason for her statement, perhaps, is that Democrats have shown that they're not willing to respect the will of the voters. You know, Rick Scott won on election night. You know, he was successful. It was, you know, a 12,000 vote margin. The voters spoke. They were incredibly clear on November 6th, but yet the entire state was put through this long, prolonged recount process. You know, lots of folks taken away from their families, from their jobs to volunteer. It was entirely unnecessary. The will of the voters was clear. You know, in the history of American politics, we have never had a recount overturn a margin of more than 1,200 votes. So, you know, when we're sitting here looking at a margin of 12,000 votes and 1,200 votes is the most we've ever seen overturn, you knew that this was going to go the way of the voters. Thank God.
What about the claim of voter suppression and the evidence? Does it exist or not exist in Georgia?
You know, I think that the Democrats look at elections these days as an opportunity for litigation. You know, it's just like redistricting. They haven't been successful at the ballot box, and they're unwilling to believe that the same voters that could put Donald Trump in the White House would be the voters that would select their representatives now. They're unwilling to believe that. And so they are taking their fight to the courthouses. And I feel like it's our job, and we did this with Governor Scott's lead, you know, it's our job to make sure that these rules are followed and to protect the decision that the voters made on November 6th. You know, I don't think there was voter suppression. I think it was important to make sure the law was followed, and I was proud to be a part of Governor Scott's mandate to make sure that happened.
In terms of the matching laws, matching the name to what's on the ballot when people check in to vote, there's a lot of suggestion that that was overly onerous for voters. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so, this was something the state looked at in 2016. This is something they've looked at incredibly recently. And again, they put protections in place to make sure that it wasn't overly onerous for voters. The counties are required to provide notice to voters to tell them if their signature's not good enough so they can go in and have an opportunity to correct that. There are plenty of protections in place to make sure that, their votes are counted. I mean, Republicans want people to vote. They want their votes to be counted. It's Democrats that want to change the law so that valid legal votes are worth less because they're bringing in lots of illegal votes. I mean, are we to the place where, if people are interested in Georgia, that they should start voting, or, if people really care about this race, their vote should count twice? I mean, it kind of seems sometimes that that's what Democrats are looking for here.
So one last question. In terms of the laws that they tried to amend after the election was over, in terms of how long they could go ahead counting ballots, are there challenges on that you're pushing against as you prepare for the 2020 presidential election?
Absolutely. I think the Democrats really showed their hand here. They showed what they're willing to do, to throw out deadlines that have been established for years, to require these new, requirements for voters in order to get their vote counted. I mean, it's just quite ridiculous. And so, I think the NRSC at Governor Scott's lead, we're going to see what we can do about continuing to fight these battles, because I think it's incredibly important to make sure that when a person goes in to vote, they've read on the rules, they understand what they have to do, they've done it correctly. They need to know that their vote will be counted. They also need to know that people who haven't followed the rules, these rules that are designed to make sure people can vote, they need to know that their votes won't be counted. So, we have to work really, really hard to make sure that happens.
Jessica First Johnson, thank you very much. Good to have you here tonight.
Thank you so much.
So here now, Katie Pavlich, townhall.com, Fox News editor and Fox News contributor, and Juan Williams, co-host of The Five and a Fox News political analyst. Juan, I'm guessing that you take issue with some of what she just said.
Well, I think the clear issue for me is she was saying, that people have to know that there's a procedure. You have to follow the procedure in order to vote. But I think lots of people, especially I would point out in Georgia, did just that. They applied, they registered to vote, and it's over 50,000, Martha, voter registration cards that were rejected by, guess who? Brian Kemp, who was the Secretary of State, who was also the candidate for governor of Georgia.
Are these 50,000 people, where's the outcry from them that their vote did not end up counting? Because, a number of accounts of this say that doesn't seem to exist, that they're not seeing that.
Well, I don't think we're seeing it. But again, what you're dealing with, especially in the Abrams campaign, is an effort to get people who were not participating in the election to come out to vote for a first time. Lots of first-time voters. We're talking here about young people, minorities, who typically are not quick to participate in the midterms. I think they lose interest. But the point here is, I don't think that Brian Kemp should be running an election in which he is a candidate.
Is it right for Stacey Abrams to charge that there was voter suppression in the Georgia race, Katie?
It is not appropriate for her to charge that there was voter suppression. And if we can't cite something if it doesn't exist as evidence of voter suppression.
The 53,000 ballots voter registration cards exist.
And are making this argument that because the Secretary of State, Brian Kemp, cleaned up the voter rolls 8 years ago, that somehow he was suppressing the vote. But the problem is that when you don't clean up voter rolls, A, it's illegal to do that, and B, that is a breeding ground for voter fraud. And so it is the Secretary of State's job in every single state, not just Georgia, to make sure that those rolls are cleaned up. And I just have to say, in America, we pride ourselves on the peaceful transition of power. And this continuing, refusal to accept the legitimacy of elections when you just don't like the outcome. We keep hearing all about attacks on democracy, the delegitimization of our elections, not accepting a result just because you don't like it without any evidence to back up your claims of voter suppression or voter fraud even. That causes real problems about undermining democracy.
People do have to have a confidence in the system and that the system works on all sides. But when you look back into this idea of voter suppression, it was a law that was passed in 1997 under a Democratic legislature and Democrat Governor Zell Miller to make sure that people who had died and people who had moved out of Georgia were not on those voter rolls because they didn't want anyone to abuse those lists of dead and moved away in order to create vote fraud.
Isn't that a good thing? That's a great thing. But here's the thing. There's no evidence of any voter fraud. We're not discussing that. We're talking about people who filled out a registration form and saw it thrown out. We're talking about people who are absentee ballots being discarded. We're talking about polling places, Martha, being closed and being told, oh, the toilets don't work. Oh, it's a black neighborhood. That's why we're closing those polling places.
Okay, well, that was a lot to unpack there, but I want to go back to your claim about there's no voter fraud here. That is exactly the point. The reason why the Secretary of State goes through the rolls and makes sure that there are not eligible people on the rolls is to prevent those kinds of voter fraud. And this idea that you're arguing that there was suppression and polling places closed purposely in black communities to keep them out of the voting place is a pretty serious charge to make when we haven't seen evidence of that.
No,
happen.
we have seen, because we know about those polling places being closed. And let's go to Florida for a second.
But Juan, it wasn't because they were closed based
Last
on
thought from Juan, last thought from you, Juan, and then I got to go.
Okay, so I think that what you're seeing here is a situation where Republican candidates say we're going to choose our voters rather than have voters choose the candidates. And they do that by focusing on suppressing voters who they think are young, minorities, and oftentimes women, Martha, who they think are not going to vote Republican.
All right, Katie and Juan, thank you very much. Good to see you tonight. Coming up right here, Homeland Security officials now warning that hundreds of criminals are part of the migrant caravan that is gathering at the southern border. Part of the response, new razor wire fencing that is covering miles of the border now. U.S. Customs and Border reports of several casualties, including a police officer. Mike Tobin joins us now live from the scene with the latest breaking news on that tonight. Good evening, Mike.
Good evening, Martha. And we're waiting for an update from police, particularly about the condition of that police officer. Lots of indications that we're not going to get good news about the condition of that police officer. He was taken away from Mercy Hospital here in critical condition, and we're waiting for an update from police. We know that the gunman is dead now through official police channels. Some reports that he was shot in the face, some reports that he shot himself. Witnesses say the incident started just before 3:30 this afternoon local time when a man and a woman were walking here near Mercy Hospital. They had a conflict. The woman ended up on the ground and the gunman stood over her and discharged multiple shots, then continued into the hospital. Again, that is according to witnesses from the scene here. One thing we heard very clearly from the witnesses is the amount of chaos and terror that was here at the hospital.
I heard 6 or 7 shots, pop, pop, pop. I dropped my grocery bags on the sidewalk and told the man, let's seek cover. And so we sped off to the side, and I kept recording, and I heard 6 more shots.
Now, the local ABC affiliate is reporting that the gunman is a former fiancé of one of the victims. So indications that the motivation here was a domestic conflict. But one of the things that is very apparent is the kind of danger that police officers face every day. Rather routine duty at a hospital turned deadly in just a matter of moments. And police are about 45 minutes late giving their update on the scene out here and on this officer's condition. We're watching that very closely. Every indication that the news we get from the police will not be good news, Martha.
Awful. Mike, thank you very much. So tonight, after years of watching migrants climb over the border fences at night and sometimes in broad daylight, one of the newer low-tech devices being used is enormous amounts of barbed wire. More than 12 miles of it now stretches from the beach in California to the San Ysidro port of entry and around that port of entry in places. Today, they shut it down for several hours there to lay concrete barriers and new wire to keep order there, where there are reports that migrants may attempt to rush the port to gain entry. They're being pressured by some Tijuanans to go back to Honduras.
We do know of incidences here in Tijuana and in other cities that some of these people that are coming into with these caravans are committing crimes. And so we are protesting, I am protesting that we want the government to take control. We want them to stop them at the border and register them, check who they are.
Donald Trump es verdad, es una invasión.
Joining me now, Pete Flores, director of the San Diego office for U.S. Customs and Border Patrol. Pete, good evening. Thanks for being here tonight. You know, you look at all that razor wire that is being laid down across the tops of those walls that we've seen people climb over in the past. Why wasn't that done before?
I think we've always had wire in our inventory of what we did at the border across the southwest border. So it's not something new. I think based on the size of this caravan, based on the violence and the force that we had seen used by this caravan, we really thought that it was in our best interest to take a look at our vulnerabilities and some of the gaps we had at the border and quickly make those assessments and do what we could to put up some additional infrastructure on our borders, at our ports of entry, to ensure we didn't have mass incursions.
All right. The understanding is that there's about 6,000 people across the border and that they are near the port of entry in San Ysidro, and that the people in Tijuana want them to go back to Honduras. How do you think this is going to end?
Well, I think, you know, from the very beginning, this caravan has been different, not only just because of its size, but because of the violence, the criminal elements in the caravan, the use of force, and then the messaging of the individuals in the caravan. So I think in Mexico, as they went through Mexico and now have arrived in Tijuana, we have individuals who are waiting in line, and orderly waiting in line for a process of asylum to come through the ports of entry and make their request.
Yeah, I understand there's about 100 people who are being processed every day through the typical procedure that is expected to be carried out. You know, I'm just curious, there's a lot of people who said that this was ridiculous, that this was all overstated, that it wasn't, you know, that there's no invasion going on, and that this is simply not a big deal, that it was used for election to put fear into people before the election. What do you say to that?
I think from what we see in Tijuana, the 6,000 that we have, there's 6,000 plus we have in Tijuana, the other 12 to 1,300, potentially more now that we have in Mexicali. The caravan and those members, just the amount of what we see in those caravans is real. And it's problematic for us as they look to potentially avoid or try to circumvent the normal process to coming through our ports of entry in a legal way.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about Kirstjen Nielsen being removed from her post. Do you think there's a need for new leadership?
I think what we're doing right now, I think under DHS and what we're doing today, we have great leadership in what we're doing and how we're attacking this problem set that we have. This is a big issue, and there are gaps in how we handle immigration, the process, the loopholes that we have in the law. So there are gaps that need to be closed in order for us to be successful.
One more quick question before I let you go. The president pointed out that he thought it was interesting, ironic was his word, that a lot of the people coming through in the caravan are waving the flags of the home country that they say is persecuting them and making it impossible for them to live in that country. Do you find that surprising?
Well, I find that we have seen that in the past, but when Mexico has offered these individuals, they've offered them asylum status, they have offered them work permits, they've offered them workshops on how to obtain asylum and work permits in Mexico. So the Central Americans that are passing through Mexico, if in fact they do have fear or fear to be in Central America, they have an option. They've been provided that option, and they should take advantage of it.
Thank you very much, Pete Flores. Good to have you here tonight.
Thank you.
So did you see this new profile of Nancy Pelosi where she's quoted as saying, "No one gives you power. You have to take it from them." So how will that play with Democrats already wary of giving her the gavel?
I like her. Can you believe it? I like Nancy Pelosi.
Maybe inciting a bit of rebellion in her own ranks. 16 Democrats have written an open letter opposing her for Speaker, saying our majority came on the backs of candidates who said that they would support new leadership because voters in hard-won districts and across the country want to see real change in Washington. We promise to change the status quo, and we intend to deliver on that promise, they wrote. But the president wants her to win. So could Republicans help Pelosi keep the gavel? Joining me now, Jason Chaffetz, who once ran for House Speaker himself, and Richard Fowler, syndicated radio talk show host. Both are Fox News contributors. Welcome, gentlemen. Good to have you with us this evening. So the Democrats right now are at 232. That number could increase if we just show the balance of power. Undecided is 4 right now, as some of those races are continuing to be decided. And then we have the list of 22 who are now in the House who promised that they would oppose Pelosi when she, if indeed they were elected. So, Richard, how do you think this is going to go, and how do you think she's going to navigate this?
Well, listen, in another network, Nancy Pelosi said it best, that one thing her father taught her, the former mayor of Baltimore, is how to count. And she is quite a tactician. So I think she's counting the votes, and she's talking to her folks, and she's trying to figure out how she do it. Don't get me wrong. I think that, Pelosi's going to have to make some changes and some concessions. One of that is she's going to have to come up with a plan when she's no longer the speaker. I think she'll probably have one more term left. I think 2, we're going to have to do what the Republicans did a long time ago and have some chairman and have some, term limits on chairmanships and some other things, and also diversifying her leadership team so it looks more like her caucus. So I think she's going to have to make those changes.
So it sounds like you think she's going to survive, despite the fact that
do.
she can't lose 18 votes, and she's got 22 people who just signed this letter. But you're pointing out some of the possible negotiation tactics, which she may be able to employ to hold on to it. She might get GOP votes, Jason Chaffetz. Is that a possibility, do you think?
I think it's really hard for Republicans to do that, but there is no greater foil than Nancy Pelosi. If you're going into 2020, you'd much rather be out there talking about a Nancy Pelosi than, say, a Beto O'Rourke or some new, fresh face that's suddenly the speaker, to juxtapose that person against, say, Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell. But I don't think the Democrats are going to go there. Nancy Pelosi has raised more money than anybody in the history of the United States Congress. Democrat, Republican, House or Senate. She rules with an iron fist. She's not going to let it go, and that's why they don't have the votes today. If they would have had the vote this week, as they normally and customarily do, but she doesn't have the votes right now.
So let's take a look at the Senate balance of power. The Mississippi race is still out there. That's going to be right after Thanksgiving. Currently, they are at 52 rather, and if they lose Mississippi, they could go to 51. Remember this moment from Lindsey Graham talking about the balance of power in the Senate. Watch this.
This is the most unethical sham since I've been in politics. Boy, y'all want power. God, I hope you never get it. I hope the American people can see through this sham.
Obviously, that was during his most impassioned moments during the Kavanaugh hearing. But the question, Richard, is whether or not Maxine Waters has spoken very forcefully about wanting to impeach President Trump, whether or not Democrats, if they do continue to gain power on the Hill, will go down that road, and whether or not Nancy Pelosi will be able to hold them back.
Well, listen, I think impeachment's very, very far off. I think there are probably a handful of members that want to talk about impeachment, but I think that's far off. I think what you're going to see the Democrats do in their first 100 days in running the House is they're probably going to pass a Voting Rights Act. They're probably going to find a way to ensure that people with pre-existing conditions get health care. They're going to probably find a way to pass a bill to make prescription drugs lower. They're going to do exactly what they promised the voter they were going to do. And Jason is right. Republicans can use Nancy Pelosi as a foil if they
subject. You didn't answer the question, Richard.
I did answer the question.
Answer the question.
I did answer the question, but
changing the subject.
Let me make this one point. The one point
I
is
think
that
his answer was that he doesn't think it's going to happen. You sound like you do not think impeachment is going to be on the table. Last quick thought, Jason. You disagree?
They have an insatiable desire, the Democrats do, to juxtapose themselves against Donald Trump and prove to their base that they are going tough on Donald Trump. They've already pre-announced 86 different investigations. They've already presupposed the outcome of those investigations, and they are not going to be able to help
That's what you want
themselves.
to happen, Jason. We want to fix the problems for the American people. You
They've
guys
already
must
announced
investigate,
it, Richard.
but we are
That's
going
already
to
in the
work
rearview mirror. They've
tirelessly
already
to
announced it.
ensure
We'll see
that
what
folks
happens.
with pre-existing conditions get
The
protections.
proof will be in exactly what happens, and we're about to see it unfold. Thanks, you guys. Great to see you tonight.
Good to see you.
So we have a Fox News alert for you. We mentioned this before, and Fox News can now confirm that police officers shot at Mercy Hospital in Chicago. Tweet, with proper forest management, we can stop the devastation constantly going on in California. Get smart, exclamation point. But now it turns out the governor is looking to push back on environmentalists and ease the rules in order to clear more trees and build more roads. Claudia Cowan live in Chico, California with the full report tonight. Claudia.
Good evening, Martha. That's right. Outgoing Governor Jerry Brown now talking about relaxing the rules a little bit as they pertain to logging. Of course, he's going to have a big fight on his hands from environmental groups. But the politics of forest management policy, really the last thing on the minds of people here. For thousands of fire survivors, this disaster recovery center that opened at the Chico Mall is their first stop on the long road to recovery and rebuilding. And this center has been buzzing with activity since it opened on Friday. Here, people can register with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, to apply for federal aid. They can also access services like the DMV and mental health counseling. They can even pet a therapy dog. Several dozen agencies are at this one-stop shop that will stay open until it's no longer needed, likely sometime next year.
Well, that's devastating, and there's going to be grief, and we'll all go through those different parts of grief. It's also really encouraging to see this community come together.
Over the weekend, President Trump surveyed the damage in Paradise. This is a conservative district in a deep blue state, and many residents here appreciated the president's visit.
I'm grateful for all the support that he's giving us. He didn't have to come here the way California's treated him, and he did. And for that, I'm very grateful.
Joe Florence and his family were among the 100 or so who gathered for a vigil last night to mourn those who perished and find strength to face the days ahead. Evacuees said being around others who've also lost everything provided a measure of comfort, as did the banner on the altar proclaiming "We will rise from the ashes," #Paradise Strong, #Butte County Strong. With rain in the forecast for tomorrow, recovery teams are intensifying their efforts to find bones or bone fragments before the ground and ashes turn to mud. The campfire is now almost out, having burned an area roughly equivalent in size to the city of Chicago. Another victim was found yesterday, increasing the number of those killed by the campfire to 77. Martha.
Awful. Thank you very much. Claudia Cowan in California tonight. And this Fox News alert as we await a press conference in moments from Chicago. Fox News confirming the police officer shot there today is dead. And chaos on the streets of Portland as dueling protests turn very ugly, leading to confrontations like this.
It's okay.